welcome to episode 46 of Massalia Tales. In the previous episode, we saw the Daemons seeking action against the Caturoi, taking one of their settlements as the wait for Archaebosphorus had gotten too long. Finally, their forces did show up, and the Daemons were able to help the Archaebosphorus version of the Daemons attack a Caturoi settlement. Most of their forces stayed back while the Archaebosphorus forces did the work. A few cavalry got involved, and many lives were actually lost. Cretheus in the east suffered from multiple assassination attempts, him being wounded and his wife being killed as the council and its allies take revenge on him. We joined a new war, going to war with Mascat on the end of Arabia in order to gain some port territory there, while Timouchoi moved off to find more minor Caturoi settlements to attack. The Mascat abandoned their territory as we advanced, so we easily captured the port, giving us access to new lands to the east. Now let's continue. The Iceni tribe, aware that the Massalian forces had not left Britannia after completing their operations, were fully prepared for war. Their armies guarded all the routes out of the Massalian sector, and vastly outnumbered the army of Herakleides. But these factors barely played into the decisions made by Bendis and the Timouchoi to engineer a reason to conquer the rest of the island. Eustachus, the most naive of the Timouchoi, was to be on the front line of the engagement, a role more likely to bring death than glory. There was no plan for how victory could be achieved, or even an analysis of whether it was even possible. Bendis simply knew that if he could be held responsible for securing the resources of Britannia, he could become exceedingly rich. Welcome back to Massalia Tales. You'll have to excuse me slightly, because I'm recording this one while ill. You might remember that our Timouchoi was besieging Petrodava, a Caturoi settlement, with a surprisingly powerful garrison inside, considering how much smaller and less experienced it is than our Timouchoi's force. I decided to just keep that siege going. I could have assaulted and definitely won, but we've seen that battle before, basically, so I thought I'll just be patient and siege them out. Now, the situation in Britannia is going to be the focus of this episode, where we already know the Iceni have at least 2 full stacks of troops standing around, one of them on my border, and we too have full stacks, 2 stacks fortified next to the town. At the town, I'm slightly upgrading the navy to have a more balanced force now that I've got more construction options available. So the Timouchoi are currently trying to engineer a war against the Iceni, and I thought at the same time I'll show you the relations with everyone else nearby so you see where everyone stands. We have Cimbri, a client state of ours controlling parts of Germania, who don't like us at all. The Nervi, our allies who control territory on either side, curiously. A similar situation for the Gallic Confederation controlling a split empire. Both of those are our allies. Then there's the Carnutes, who are our client state and are already at war with the Iceni, which is of course crucial. And then there's the Namnates, only a defensive ally. They're more independent there in the corner of Celtico of Gaul. There's also the Scordisci, an interesting client state of ours that control quite a lot of territory, surprisingly powerful for a client state, not on amazing terms with them, but it's okay, the region is generally stable. So as I moved on, the Iceni came back to me with their usual offer of non-aggression. Over time, they've been reducing the amount of money they want for it, but now it seems to be going back up. I think they might realise where this is heading, and of course I rejected that deal. Jumping briefly back over to Mascat, our recently conquered territory, I needed to recruit a dignitary. We have the problem here that the place is really heavily influenced by desert nomadic culture, meaning we're not really going to be able to use this place for anything until we get some Hellenic culture going, so we need it to recruit things. I also knew I was going to need a fleet in this area because the whole point of having this port is to have access to the local seas, with the objective of making landing somewhere else, but of course we'll need a fleet to control these seas. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't actually recruit anything, as it turns out, because of the lack of Hellenic culture. So I'm currently converting the place over to all the Hellenic-style buildings. We're going to have the governor getting Hellenic culture going, and soon we should be able to get rid of some enemy agents, which will also help spread Hellenic culture. In the next turn, we learn that Mascat has actually been defeated. I think their last forces were currently in the territory of my ally, so my ally must have defeated them. So this means their agents back in Mascat have actually disappeared, which is awfully useful. This is going to make life a little bit easier for me. So basically we're going to have to wait for everything to get converted, all the buildings to be made, and the cultural conversion to happen. But eventually we have an interesting access point into these Persian ports. So it seems like Persia are going to be the ideal next target on Cretheus' campaign. I decided that Cretheus himself could go back to our base in Mesopotamia, so that when we make an attack, he could attack over land while Epaphroditos would go in by sea. So now jumping back to Britannia, we suddenly have a pretense for the war that the Timouchoi have been looking for. The Britannians have moved this large and surprisingly powerful looking fleet over, full of Persian-style warships, bigger and better than our ships, but of course we have way more ships to command. So this seems like a somewhat provocative move, at least to the Timouchoi. It seems the Iceni are increasingly distrustful of us, so this is going to be the moment when we attempt to engineer our war. We're going to do it through the Carnutes so that we get a further illusion of legitimacy here. We're helping our client state, we are not merely declaring war for conquest. The Carnutes don't even want us to go to war with the Iceni. They perhaps see the danger of allowing their parent state to go to war against the Iceni and take even more territory, but we're going in for it anyway. So we are now at war. This means our fleet immediately comes out of port to challenge the approaching Iceni boats. So they have all these Persian ships, somehow superior to ours, but we just have sheer numbers, so the balance bar's in our favour. But because we haven't really seen naval battles in this series, I decided I would leave the garrison fleet behind and just use the primary fleet and see how balanced of an engagement we get with this. So the Massalia navy forms up, ready to advance on the Iceni navy, sitting right opposite us. Our ships are generally smaller than the enemy's, except for our general's ship, which is probably a little bit superior in caliber. We're in two lines, so we'll engage with the first line initially and then have a support line, and the enemy is in the exact same formation. Our ships have to just about avoid some whales which happen to be passing underneath the path of our advance, but luckily all the ships are okay. The enemy just sits still and let us advance, right, so that's just fine. So their ship's a little bit bigger than ours, as you can see, crewed with different types of units. Some of them have lots of missile units, others warriors ready to board. But there's not going to be too much boarding going on. And the garrison fleet, as I said, is going to turn right back off the field and go home. We're going to fight this using only our naval units, both for fairness and because the loss of the garrison could be costly. Incredible. How many sailors has Bendis turned to his ear? Well, then this is the day we have feared since the arrival of Eustachus revealed the intentions of the Timouchoi. Somehow I suspect my letters to them on the matter never reached their chamber. Many years ago I sat with these men at the Peak, as they called it. Gelon's little throne room was what it really was at the time. I wonder what the chamber looks like now. Most likely a huddle of conspirators damning the council, damning our peace treaties, and damning that any decency remains in the Republic. Not that we will remain a republic much longer with such doings. So then it is up to us to win glory in battle, survive, and use our power to shut down these ludicrous machinations of Bendis. As the ship lines close on each other, a chaotic battle begins. We're both ramming each other, but the enemy's ships have stronger rams than mine, so my ships sink immediately upon receiving a single blow, while the enemy's will take 2 or 3. Luckily I have more ships, so for every ship I lose I can simply bring in another ship to continue the ramming action. So we're going to have to be careful. Already, after about 10 seconds of engagement, we've lost 2 ships. Losses amounting very quickly. Our general luckily avoids being rammed mostly and is boarded by the enemy. That will make him survive a lot longer. Many of the other ships are just preparing to throw javelins at the enemy's crew, having lost the room and space to maneuver they need to do ramming actions now they're in really close. The enemy have plenty of missile units on their ships, particularly they have lots of slingers, while I instead have lots of javelin men, and I think javelin men are probably more useful in a naval battle because they cause lots of casualties very quickly, and because slingers will probably have their ships sunk before they have time to use all their ammunition. So you can see here on the flank I've got 3 small ships full of javelin men just throwing jabs at the crew of this larger ship and taking them out very quickly. These ships will soon rout off the field, so we don't even have to worry about trying to set up ramming actions to sink them. Again here, I've got swordsmen who are also armed with javelins, throwing up against the larger ships, trying to kill the crew before they go in for boarding actions. Many of my ships I'm ordering to do ramming actions, but they kind of get stuck, especially when they're very close to enemy ships and are unable to do it. So here on the other flank, I'm doing a similar thing to what we saw on the first flank, where I'm just sending 3 little ships full of javelineers to go around taking out enemy crews. My general and his ship is under a lot of pressure. You can see enemies doing very powerful jumps to get up onto the deck and continuing the battle there. I brought up more ships to support, but they're not being very useful. They're targeting the ships next to them, but not actually doing anything. I think they're a little bit stuck because there are just ships everywhere. Luckily, my smaller Jav ships are now coming in from behind the enemy's positions. Once they're out of Javs, I converted them over to ramming mode, so they can do minor damage in ramming actions, but because there's so many of them, we can ram them from loads of different angles with loads of different ships, and altogether, they are able to do heavy damage to these larger enemy vessels. with their fleet pretty much surrounded at this point. It's just a matter of coordinating that and getting as many ships on the enemy as we can. Trying to avoid ramming myself, as you can see I'm doing here. Some of the enemy ships here in the middle are holding out because my own ships are in the way, but very soon we're going to deplete the enemy's forces here. A full unit of crew is wasted as their ship sinks before they could deploy their melee forces to board any of my ships. The fight with my general is starting to balance out as the enemy's crew are being killed, and we're going to try and sink their ships as well, which of course will destroy them. On the other flank, we lost one of our ships to an enemy boarding action. The boarders managed to burn the ship, but they lost a lot of their number, and you can see they're totally surrounded by these javelin ships. So we're just ramming it from every side, slowly destroying it, and now finally we managed to sink that ship. And at that moment, the enemy's general ship routs and the battle ends in a decisive victory. Nothing too special, but it's nice to just see a little bit of naval action. Although our ships were outclassed and the losses were relatively heavy, we've won our first victory against the Iceni. So here in the battle results, you can see we lost 4 ships altogether, with another few ships losing significant portions of their crew. The enemy fleet, though, lost all of its ships but one. The general's ship managed to escape, the admiral's ship, I should say. But of course, on its own, it's not really going to do any damage. I'll enslave the small number of captives we took from the battle. So we've struck a blow against our enemy, but now it's time to decide what we do next. The land portion is going to be the important part. We already know the positions of 2 of their armies, one on the border and one in their capital. So of course I could attack them right now, and that might have actually been in my advantage to do that, but I decided I'm going to take a defensive posture in line with Herakleides' preferences. What we're going to do is, because we know the enemy is virtually certain to come down the road here to attack us, we can set up an ambush somewhere along the road to try and catch them. And that's what Eustachus is going to do. So he goes into the forest and sets up an ambush, and hopefully from where he is he might actually be able to ambush on the roads both to the north and south as the enemy come by. Herakleides is going to stay close by in the fort, both as bait and in case the ambush force is discovered and then gets attacked on its own, so Herakleides can come in and reinforce them. So with our defences set up, we are simply going to wait and see if the enemy come in and do what we want them to. Now my next objective was to see if any of the other factions nearby were willing to join the war in order to support me. You can see the narrators here refuse to go to war even for massive sums of money. They're so against it. So I basically went around all of these local factions seeing if anyone would join the war, especially when I offered money. Most of them didn't. The Nervii were willing to come into the war for a not particularly significant amount of money. So that's something. It's now us, Nervii, and the Carnutes all at war with the Iceni. But it's going to be us, of course, doing the vast majority of the work in this. So as we move on, the Iceni make a move. First they come up, and I thought they were about to get ambushed because they sort of stopped in front of it, but I think they must have seen the ambush force, decided to bypass it. They brought up an extra reinforcement stack, bringing their total strength up to 3 armies, and now they're just attacking the settlement, and Eustachus in his ambush position is unable to be a reinforcement army in this battle, meaning our strength is lower than it should be. We basically have the garrison, we have the navy, and we have Herakleides coming in as reinforcements. The enemy army in this battle is exceedingly powerful. You can see the general leading their force is ridiculously leveled up. All of his troops are going to have tons of stat buffs, and they are also at high rank as well. Their army's full of different types of troops, loads of medium swords, loads of javelineers, loads of skirmishers, loads of very heavy sword champion units which are very difficult to take down. Overall, it looks like this war is going to be decided in one massive decisive battle right at the very start. The enemy begin their attack, focusing on the east, and as you might be able to guess, this battle is going to end up getting pretty laggy once the full number of troops gets on the field, so enjoy the smoothness while it lasts. So we're formed up in a traditional defensive formation with the garrison to the hoplites covering the approaches. I'm bringing in extra hoplites from the navy, only 1 unit of hoplites to deploy by landing that in the town. The rest of the navy is making a move round to the back of the enemy's position. This is the closest they can land to the enemy, surprisingly. Still quite far away, but that does actually link up quite nicely with the enemy's reinforcement direction. Their reinforcements contain most of the stronger troops. Here is the main unit, these very heavy melee infantry. These are the champions. These guys are superior to my infantry in just about every way, and there's loads of them. And this is the primary problem for us in this battle. A lot of the work is going to fall upon Herakleides, of course, coming in now with some of his army. Because of the unit limit, we can't deploy his full forces. We have 3 legionary units and 2 heavy pike units, so we're going to have to try and make do with these until some of our men are destroyed so we can bring in reinforcements.
This is the day the X above our heads is snatched away and turned on the execute. Everything we have done was all in preparation for today. Throughout all the wars there was always land we could not take. always some reason why our mighty island could never be free of danger. But tonight, the dream of our ancestors will finally come true. There will be none but the brave and free people of our tribe in command of this land, and nothing left of the Greek dogs but their blood and bones. I know you all share my vision of a strong, united Britain, with a free people who choose their own leaders and live their lives as they wish, without interfering from foreign tyrants like these so-called Massalians. And I know, too, that you all have made great sacrifices to bring so many skilled warriors to my camp. Now it is time to be repaid and get justice for our suffering under these Greek dogs. Let the spoils of war be not just their gold, not just their slaves, but the peace of mind offered by their complete annihilation. For the glory of its sin tribe and the freedom of Britain, I say to you all, the fight for freedom starts today!
Early on, one of the primary problems for us in this battle arises, which is the enemy's sheer number of skirmishing troops. Here you can see one of the main types of unit they have. It's a skirmish unit equipped with heavy shields and spears as well, and they begin bombarding the garrison hoplites as some of their infantry advance. We of course have our own skirmishers, but not on the same caliber. These local archers, though, will be able to inflict casualties on the enemy's infantry as they advance, because although the infantry are super buffed with stats, they're still not all that good against missiles. So we bring down a number of their infantry as they advance at the phalanx, and of course once they reach the phalanx they'll struggle to get through. The archers can continue to fire, and curiously they only sent this one unit of infantry to attack this front of the battle, so it seems they don't particularly care about this side of the town. You can see I'm comparing the stats on the bottom left there. The enemy have much higher attack than us, but we, because of our phalanx formation, have much higher defense, so overall it matches out okay, and the fact the archers are firing mean we'll win that little engagement. Herakleides is taken by surprise when a unit of enemy Javcav suddenly appears. These guys can hide very easily right in front of his army and starts attacking him at point blank range. I send out some of my lancers to chase them off, the lancers being the fastest of the cavalry. Herakleides himself can't catch them. The enemy very kindly actually agreed to fight in melee, which they didn't have to do, and that's going to make life much easier for me. The lancers aren't all that good in melee of course, but the legionaries approaching the town now can go into that melee and help out so that we'll win. Meanwhile, back with the hoplites, the arrows raining down are inflicting massive casualties on the enemy. My hoplites, of course, barely doing anything there, so the fight is almost won. We've also now landed the naval crews. You can see how small their units look in comparison to the enemy's. Quite puny, but we are going to need them. They're in a crucial position behind the massive bulk of the enemy's skirmishing forces, so that means they can advance up and perhaps try and get them to go into melee. Those enemy Javcav are now cut down, especially with the arrival of the pikemen who joined the fight and overwhelmed the enemy, so we can now continue on safely to start building up our formation behind the enemy's main attack vector, which is coming in right here on the north side of the town, leading with a lot of the medium infantry. Although, truth be told, they are technically medium infantry, their stats are boosted up so high that they're really quite equal with heavy or very heavy infantry. So, as they slam here into the garrison hoplites, they're going to have quite a fine time. Here as well, fighting citizen hoplites, they're going to have an even easier time. I think citizen hoplites are just about matched, you can see it on the stats, with the enemy. And of course that's a problem because we have much fewer troops than the enemy, so a matched engagement is definitely not what we want. But we can't do anything about that right now, so we're going to have to just try and hold that for as long as possible. The rest of the enemy's forces on the east, although I was still thinking they might attack from the east, were now showing that they weren't interested in this attack direction, and instead they were just going to allow their skirmishers to destroy my hoplites in this area. It was vital that I got the naval crew up fast to engage those skirmishers so I could keep those hoplites alive. They wouldn't last for long against such a bombardment. Now Herakleides couldn't really rear attack the enemy who were attacking the north because the strength of the enemy's reinforcements was so great with all of these really heavy troops coming in. If I tried to envelop the enemy now, I would be counter-enveloped. The enemy has basically area denied me the entire portion of their back line, and because of this, the skirmishing forces in this area are able to start engaging with Herakleides' men, reducing their health before they even come into fighting. Back on the east side, I decided to start moving out, because sitting here, getting hit by the enemy's slinger fire was not going to be too helpful in the long run. The enemy would actually very rapidly defeat my men if I allowed that to continue. We needed to move out and fight them. My primary weapon against those enemies will be my archers, because if I run at them, the slingers will just run away. So I need to use my archers to try and beat them in a skirmishing engagement, and I'll move up my javelineers from the navy to help with that. Herakleides now sees his first action as the enemy diverts a few forces to come and attack him. Hails of javelins cut down forces on both sides, but the enemy get the worst of that javelin engagement, and now the main fight begins. I've got a lot of faith in the legionaries. They're generally a solid, high stat, high morale unit. The enemy stats, you can see, lower pretty much across the board, so in this engagement we're going to be fine. Plus we have Jav support that will take them out, but of course this is only their medium infantry. Fighting against the enemy's very heavy melee infantry is going to be a different matter, but for now the legionaries are fine, and of course they're going to be supported by Herakleides, who's going to make the first cavalry charge of this battle, bringing himself with his heavy cavalry and his units of lancers to smash into the flank of this unit. Normally a medium unit would probably break under such enormous pressure, but these guys have super buffed morale because of their really high quality general and all of their training. So they actually fight on and resist several cycle charges, losing the vast majority of their men before routing. Now my Javelineers are in position to start engaging the first of the enemy's heavy slinger units, hitting them from behind, the enemy not even turning round to face us with their shields, which of course is perfect. So we'll start doing some decent damage to that enemy. Our archers are also now getting in position to start raining arrows on some of the other units. I mean, the main problem though is that the enemy are a heavy unit basically. They have shields and spears, so when they come under fire, they will use those shields to protect themselves, reducing the effectiveness of taking them down with arrows, where of course they can fire back with stones and easily destroy my archers. So we don't really have a skirmish advantage, but I'm hoping that the attack by the Javelineers will inflict so many casualties on these men that will counteract any enemy advantage that's here, especially if the enemy tries to hit my hoplites instead of the archers, because of course they are shielded and armoured, so their attacks will do much less damage. Back over on the main fight, you can see the enemy has pushed in pretty much everything now. Previously they had a quite large reserve, but they've just pushed in everything into this fight, meaning they have an absolutely gigantic frame-chewing advantage in this fight, and of course the man-to-man advantage isn't very much in my favour. That's actually a really dangerous situation, which we need to get in and help. Herakleides just needs to deal with these men, and now he can successfully rear-flank the enemy because things are a lot more clear. I did though have to sacrifice one more unit of shot cav to chase off enemy jav cav who were marauding my troops. This time the enemy decided not to engage in melee and just run, so we'll have to chase them off. This battle is really starting to heat up at this point. Curses! Damned curses! How is that possible? We watched the roads. Was that not enough? They've seen through me for sure. They leave me as a stray cub while they slay the lions, soon to return for easy meat. If it took you a full day to reach me, then the matter of Iska is already resolved one way or the other. What manner of war is this in which comrades cannot stand together? What manner of an enemy could pass by undetected despite all our efforts? Break camp everyone, we must march. Where to I do not know, but I know that death stalks the lands with silent steps, unseeable, unknowable until the fires of the underworld cast its shadow across us. As Herakleides prepares to make his rear attack on the main bulk of the enemy's force, let's have a little look at what's going on the town side, where the garrison are holding on against the enemy. Here you can see some garrisoned hoplites. Unfortunately, they've lost nearly half their troops trying to withhold the enemy, and that number continues to decline, their morale starting to be shaken by the onslaught the enemy are putting against them. I wanted to try and see what the stats of the enemy were, because it says here that the hoplites are losing decisively, and it's rare for such a powerful unit as hoplites to be losing so badly. I can only very occasionally select them, but it's their champions that have now fought their way to the front of the battle that have ridiculous stats. Their melee attack pretty much off the charts, and their morale super high too. Their defense isn't all that high, but hoplites have really low attack values, so it doesn't really matter the enemy don't have defense because we're not going to be killing them anyway. So overall, the hoplites in big trouble. Herakleides really needs to start putting some pressure on the enemy from behind. Some of the enemy actually came out to start the battle early. They came to engage with my pike phalanx from the front. Of course, ideal for me, very willing to let them do that, especially with these light spears, pretty much naked, totally unarmoured, an ideal target for my men to be fighting. Their skirmishers nearby were now vulnerable to cavalry charges, but of course these skirmishers are actually secretly a spear unit, so as my lancers make their attack, it doesn't really do any damage, and the enemy just pull out their shields and spears and come straight into melee. Normally a skirmish unit would be routed by a lancer charge against it, but here the enemy's morale is shaken, then restores, and then they engage in a deadly melee. I'm going to have to use cycle charges to kill them because we can't win out in an actual fight. Meanwhile, we started to do some decent damage to the enemy's skirmishing lines. Of course, we are actually out of javelins in many cases, which means it's up to the archers to do most of the damage, but we're slowly working our way through them. Unfortunately, some of them who have come back from routing are now getting sneaky rear attacks on me, which I didn't notice. Way out on the corner of the map, those lancers I sent to get rid of the enemy's Javcav are still going. Unfortunately for the Javcav, they've reached the edge of the map. The red line of death will now stop them, so the lancers are going to be able to successfully make a rear charge against them. I expected this to be absolutely devastating. Unfortunately, it wasn't, possibly just because these enemy cav, although they're only light, have their stats super buffed, so even a rear attack by lancers doesn't do huge damage, but we still have a superiority to them in straight melee, so I'm going to let them just fight on the edge of the map, and hopefully my men will win out eventually. Here you can see the enemy skirmishers in the awkward moment between cycle charges where my men are just standing there. I wasn't cycle charging properly because I was microing all over the battlefield, so I had a lot of men just standing around waiting to do things. Here you can see one of my Thorax Hoplite units has already lost a third of its troops, and it's only fought with one enemy regiment and taken fire from enemy slingers. This is a bad sign because we've got about 40 more regiments to work our way through, standing right there. So these men are going to have to improve their performance if we're going to have any hope. The pike phalanx is doing okay, holding off the enemy, keeping them at range so they can't apply their super high melee stats against us, so that's pretty useful. Chugging through the main blob, we can go back to our hoplites from a minute ago. You can see they've lost a decent amount more of their regiment. Their morale still just about holding, but defeat is starting to seem inevitable on this part of the battlefield. Luckily I noticed this in time. I've got skirmish units behind them supporting, and I've got extra units of garrison who are no longer needed on the east part of town coming up to reinforce them from behind. Some good news is that we are starting to successfully work our way through these skirmishes and bring them down. I managed to find a use for my mob, who I thought would be totally useless in this battle, by just making the enemy get locked in position so my javelin men could take the enemy out, and now of course they can kill the routers as they go. So we work our way through them. Our javelins pretty much using all the arrow on the enemy. Some of the enemy actually come into melee. Here you can see a unit with just 20 or so men left, miraculously still not routing because of their massive morale buffs, and they attack my javelineers. You can see my men rush away en masse because they're on skirmish mode. So the enemy very effectively using only 20 men to push me all the way back there. Unfortunately, the enemy units now isolated. Herakleides leads his cavalry to finish them off. So the main bulk of the enemy's skirmishing force here has been defeated, but there are plenty more skirmishers in their reinforcement armies, so we're going to see at least as many again come onto the field to deal with later on. Back at the main fight, that unit of garrison hoplites we saw has now routed, and the capture point is starting to be taken by the enemy because they've advanced far enough forwards, which means we're going to start losing morale even faster. It's now citizen militia holding back the tide of the enemy at an awkward angle as well. The enemy can actually get through my lines here. The unit that's supposed to be in the middle is just coming up on the right now. More bad news is that the citizen militia fighting on the left side of this battle are about to rout as well, having lost more than half their troops. Overall, the situation is getting very dangerous here. Looks like the enemy have a very good chance of completely breaking through and into the town, and we won't have them locked down anymore. Herakleides' troops are fighting desperately in this really open melee at the back. Formation's totally messed up by just how many regiments are crushed together here. It's going to be up to man-to-man skill. We literally just need to kill them and try and put pressure on them, but unfortunately we're not really engaging any of the units at the front with the ones at the back because the enemy's formation is so big. Overall, it's not looking ideal, but as you can see from the timer, there's still 45 more minutes of this battle, so there's still plenty more to be said, and we'll see it next time. The ability of the Iceni to wage effective war was sorely misjudged by the impetuous strategists of the Timouchoi. They had never guessed that the Iceni had acquired Greek weapons, armor, and martial arts guides in order to fully learn the weaknesses of the Massalian fighting style. The knowledge made even their levied warriors a match for the trained hoplite in battle, knowing exactly how to break the defenses of the famous phalanx. Applying this without mercy, the officials of Isco were horrified to see their lines ripped open by the torrent of force the Iceni warriors had been waiting years to unleash. While Massalia had the advantage in arms, armor, and discipline, the Iceni's raw aggression was overcoming it all.